a servant in a queen's chamber, a shadow in the corridors of power, a name almost erased by contempt. Owen Tudor, a man whose story should have been nothing but silence, yet whose bloodline would one day crown kings. Chains rattle in the dark, and with them comes inevitability, betrayal, forbidden love, and the quiet seed of a dynasty that should never have existed. The footsteps stop, the door groans open, and history begins its descent into tragedy. From the clanging chains and the suffocating cell, the story drifts backward across years, across landscapes, until you find yourself among the windswept fields of Anglesey. The soil is hard, the cottages are poor, and the people live under a sky that has forgotten mercy. This is Wales in the shadow of conquest. Ever since Edward I's armies carved their way across these mountains in the late 13th century, the land has carried scars that never healed. Castles of stone rise like teeth of a conqueror, reminders that this soil does not belong to its own children. Owen Tudor was born here, not into wealth or comfort, but into a lineage both proud and broken. His ancestors had once carried the fire of native princes. Now their descendants bent their heads beneath foreign rule. To be Welsh was not a badge of honour. In the courts of London it was a stain, a reason for mockery, a reminder of defeat. You are not seen as equal, but as lesser, as dangerous, as something to be contained, and yet there is something haunting in this dispossession. Out of poverty is born resilience. Out of humiliation, defiance. Owen's world was one of fields and salt winds, but also of memory of a people who had lost their crown but not their hunger. A forgotten land, dismissed and despised, preparing in silence to shape the fate of England itself. From the winds of Anglesey, the vision shifts again. Stone walls rise, draped in black cloth, perfumed with the incense of mourning. This is not freedom, but a palace in grief. The year is 1422. King Henry V is dead, and his widow, Catherine of Valois, stands veiled in shadow. She is young, barely 21, yet already a relic of loss, her heart caged within the rituals of widowhood. At her side, an infant Henry VI too, fragile to comprehend the weight placed upon him. England bends around this child. But the Queen herself is bound in suspicion. Parliament had passed a law. No dowager queen could remarry without the king's consent, and until the boy came of age, her body was not her own. She was watched, her every gesture scrutinized, her grief treated as dangerous. A widow, yes, but more importantly, a vessel of political threat. And there, among her attendants, moved a man no one noticed. A Welsh servant, humbly placed, eyes lowered, voice quiet. Owen Tudor. To most, he was invisible, a shadow at the edge of royal mourning. But shadows have a way of reaching where light cannot. He passed through chambers heavy with incense and silence, carrying trays, adjusting robes, bowing when spoken to. Always present, always unseen. In this court of suspicion, it was unthinkable that a queen might see him. And yet, in the silence of grief, forbidden eyes sometimes meet. It begins not with thunder, but with silence. A chamber lit by faint candlelight, the widow's veil set aside, the air heavy with the scent of wax and sorrow. You can almost hear the heartbeat in the stillness, quick, forbidden, trembling between two souls who were never meant to meet, a queen and a servant, Catherine of Valois and Owen Tudor, a widow bound by law, a man bound by chains of birth. One look, one touch, and history shivers. The whispers start as soon as they breathe the same air too long. Attendants murmur behind doors. Courtiers trade glances. Could it be true that the Queen sought comfort not in noble arms, but in the embrace of a Welshman? In the cold geometry of politics, such a union was not love, was treason. A widow's body was a battlefield, policed and guarded, for through it might come new heirs, new threats to the crown. Yet desire does not yield to statutes. In the Queen's chamber, far from the eyes of Parliament, fingers brushed against silk, lips defied the silence, and a lineage was conceived not from royal blessing, but from secrecy and defiance. Every touch was a crime, every embrace a spark set against the dry timber of suspicion, and so, in the sheets where sorrow once lay, a dynasty began hidden, fragile, and already condemned. For England's greatest battles would not be fought only on fields of blood, but in the quiet dark where a servant's hand met a queen's grief. From the whispers of forbidden nights came cries far more dangerous infant cries, sharp and undeniable. Children born not in celebration but in secrecy. Edmund, Jasper, tiny bodies swaddled in cloth, yet already wrapped in suspicion. To the eyes of England's nobility, they were not blessings but threats, not princes but shadows, bastards. A dynasty, it was said, should be forged in the open, baptized in the clear light of legitimacy. Yet here was a lineage conceived in silence, nourished in whispers, hidden from the gaze of power. Dynasties born in the shadows of cinders is how their enemies would remember them. The innocent hands of children carried the weight of scandal, their very existence a defiance of law, and still, within the chambers that concealed them, they were more than rumor. They were flesh, blood, and heartbeat. Catherine's Sons, by Owen Tudor, proof that love, or lust, or defiance, or grief could create life even when law forbade it. Their laughter was fragile, but every echo was political, every breath a challenge, for innocence does not shield against judgment. The world was already sharpening its knives, preparing to define them not by who they were, but by how they were born. And as the children grew, so too did the shadow that followed their namer. Shadow cast not only by battle, but by the kingdom's hunger for bloodlines it could control. The crown passed to a child who never learned how to bear its weight. Henry VI, son of the conqueror, Henry V grew not into strength, but into fragility. His reign was a whisper when the realm demanded thunder. You see him seated on the throne, eyes vacant, fingers trembling, lips murmuring prayers to a god who gave him no armor. A king whose silence grew heavier than the roar of any enemy. At times, his mind broke entirely. Chroniclers wrote of him wandering like a ghost, staring at walls, forgetting his own name. Years would pass in which England had no true ruler, only a body draped in robes, a crown upon an empty gaze. The court filled the void with scheming voices, noble factions circling like wolves around a wounded lamb. And in that fracture, Owen Tudor's hidden union suddenly mattered. When the king was weak, legitimacy became a weapon, bloodlines a battlefield. Who had the right to rule when the anointed sovereign had no will to command? Every secret heir, every whispered claim grew teeth. The sons of a forbidden marriage once, dismissed as shadows now cast long silhouettes. Across the corridors of power, the wars of the roses were not born in a single moment of betrayal. They were born here, in the slow collapse of a mind, in the hollow eyes of Henry VI. A dynasty perched on madness meant that all other blood, no matter how shadowed, could one day be called to the light. The Queen is gone. Catherine of Valois breathes no more. Her body lowered into the silence of Westminster in 1437, and with her death, the fragile veil that had shielded Owen Tudor is torn away. The court, once restrained by the sanctity of a living queen, now bares its teeth. You are dragged from the shadows into the pitiless light of judgment. Imagine the iron biting into your wrists, the sound of chains scraping across stone as you are led away. You are not accused of treason, not of murder, not of theft, but of something far worse in their eyes, daring to touch a queen, daring to break the invisible wall of class and crown. The whispers that once hid in corridors now become accusations, sharpened into weapons. In the dungeon, you feel the humiliation drip heavier than the water that seeps from the ceiling. A servant, they remind you, should remain a servant. You were never meant to be more than invisible, but you broke their order, and for that you must be broken in return. The children you fathered cannot shield you. The memory of love cannot comfort you. All that remains is the cold certainty of iron and the cruelty of a world where desire is punished more harshly than betrayal. And as the cell door slams shut, the silence tells you what the court already believes. Forbidden love does not end in romance. It ends in chains. The years pass, but mercy never arrives. Owen Tudor, once the shadow at a queen's side, finds himself dragged again into the open, this time not for imprisonment, but for death. It is 1461, after the Battle of Mortimer's Cross. The Yorkist tide has risen, and Owen, loyal to his half-Lancastrian sons, is caught in its flood. They lead him to the block, and the world slows. You feel the cold February air biting your skin, hear the jeers of a crowd eager for spectacle. Not for justice, no, but for the theatre of blood. The condemned is stripped not only of life, but of dignity. A man's body becomes a message. The executioner's blade flashes, heavy with inevitability. One strike, and silence erupts into gasps, laughter, the cruel murmur of satisfaction. Owen's head is severed from his body, his face still wearing, it is said, a look of strange calm. But death is not the end. The head is spiked, carried through the streets of London, and fixed upon the bridge for all to see. Flesh turned into warning, blood into politics. There it stands, exposed to the sun by day, gnawed by birds by night. A Welsh servant who loved a queen, now reduced to a grotesque trophy of order restored. They wanted him forgotten, erased by shame. Yet the very violence meant to silence his name ensured that no one who crossed that bridge could escape his ghostly gaze. And still, his story did not die there. His blood lived on, moving silently toward destiny. The father's body lies discarded, his head a grotesque ornament on London Bridge. Yet even as Owen Tudor is reduced to carrion for crows, his sons continue to breathe. Edmund and Jasper, children once whispered as bastards, shadows of a forbidden union, are lifted from the margins into the dangerous light of legitimacy. Their half-brother, King Henry VI, fragile though he is, grants them recognition and titles. Edmund is made Earl of Richmond, Jasper, Earl of Pembroke. What began as a servant's scandal now walks in velvet halls, bearing names that echo with nobility. The paradox is unbearable. The father is executed as a criminal, but the sons are embraced as pillars of the realm. Yet this was not mercy. It was survival through blood. The Tudors, half Welsh and half Valois, carried veins that no blade could sever. In them ran both shame and power, both disgrace and destiny. Every step Edmund and Jasper took was haunted by the memory of their father's chains. Every honor shadowed by the spiked head that still stared from the bridge, and still they rose. They fought for Lancaster, defended their weak king, and preserved a family name that should have ended in silence. What England tried to erase, it had accidentally planted deeper. The dynasty lived not through dignity, but through resilience, through the refusal of blood to yield, and in the brief flame of Edmund, history prepared its most fragile yet unstoppable heir. Edmund Tudor rose swiftly, a young man cloaked in titles that barely concealed the shadow of his birth. At 24, he secured a marriage that was more than union, it was strategy. His bride, Margaret Beaufort, was scarcely 13, yet already carried the weight of a claim to the throne through her descent from Edward. 3. Their vows were whispered, not in romance, but in calculation, in the fevered hope of survival in a realm tearing itself apart. And then too soon the flames sputtered. In 1456, Edmund was captured by Yorkist forces and confined to Carmarthen Castle. Some say plague claimed him, others whisper of wounds and neglect. Whatever the cause, the result was the same: a candle snuffed before dawn. At 24, his ambition dissolved into silence. His body lowered into the earth, while his name lingered only in uncertain breaths, yet in death. Edmund left behind something fragile, almost spectral, a widow heavy with child. Margaret Beaufort, barely more than a girl, carried within her the seed of a dynasty not yet imagined. Alone, vulnerable, and watched by enemies, she walked a line between ruin and legacy. Edmund's story ended in a cell, his flame extinguished by forces greater than himself. But history does not measure by years. Lived it measures by what lingers after. And in Margaret's womb, a child stirred, destined to inherit not only a name, but the weight of every shadow before him. The womb becomes a battlefield where history waits in silence. Margaret Beaufort, still a child herself, carries the last fragile ember of Edmund Tudor. Her body bends beneath the weight of both grief and prophecy. Alone, widowed, her husband buried before the child even breathes, she becomes the vessel through which a dynasty clings to survival. In January of 1457, within the walls of Pembroke Castle, she gives birth to a son, Henry Tudor. He enters the world not to applause, but to the whispers of danger. He is no ordinary infant. He is the heir to bloodlines stitched together from scandal, from conquest, from whispers of legitimacy and illegitimacy alike. He is both nothing and everything. Even as he draws his first breath, the world sharpens its knives. Yorkist eyes glance toward Wales, calculating what it would mean if this child one day lived to claim what his father and grandfather could not. Before he can walk, he is already hunted. Before he can speak, he carries the curse of ambition upon his name. And yet, in his fragile cries lies a haunting echo, the persistence of Owen Tudor's defiance, Catherine's forbidden love, Edmund's brief flame. The seed of destiny is planted in tragedy, watered by grief, and cradled by a mother who vows, with every heartbeat, that her son will endure. But endurance would demand exile, fear, and years spent as prey before he could ever rise as king. Childhood should be a sanctuary. Yet for Henry Tudor it was a chase through shadows. In the hills of Wales, he grew not with the laughter of games, but with the echo of pursuit. Every knock at the door carried the weight of danger. Every rustle in the trees whispered Yorkist soldiers drawing closer. He was a child, hunted not for who he was, but for what he might become. When the Wars of the Roses consumed England in blood and betrayal, Wales could no longer protect him. The boy was smuggled across the sea, carried into exile in Brittany. There, in foreign halls and borrowed chambers, he learned that safety was never permanent, that every kindness was transactional, that every smile might conceal betrayal. His life was reduced to a single truth. Survival meant invisibility. Imagine being so young, and yet knowing the world's most powerful men debated daily whether you should live or die. Imagine sleep broken not by dreams, but by footsteps that might mean arrest, or worse. This constant dread etched itself into Henry's bones. He became cautious, calculating, quiet, a boy who wore fear like armor. And in that long exile, the seed of kingship was not nurtured by power, but by terror. Henry would never forget what it meant to be prey. And when prey survives long enough, it learns how to become the hunter. Through the shifting tides of betrayal and exile, one figure remained constant: Jasper Tudor, brother to the fallen Edmund, son of Owen and Catherine. He carried the memory of their forbidden union like a brand upon his soul. To Henry, he was more than an uncle. He was shield, compass, and ghost, moving between courts and battlefields with the quiet resolve of a man who understood that the survival of one child meant the survival of an entire dream. Jasper never married, never built a family of his own. His life became sacrifice, his every decision bound to the fragile heartbeat of his nephew. Chroniclers describe him as loyal beyond reason, a man who carried Henry from fortress to fortress, across seas, through storms, keeping him one step ahead of death. It was as though Owen's spirit lived on in Jasper's defiance, protecting the boy who would one day carry their bloodline beyond shame to the Yorkists. Jasper was a shadow that refused to be extinguished, a reminder that Owen Tudor's legacy could not be erased by iron or blade. To Henry, he was the embodiment of endurance itself, and so, across decades of chaos, Jasper's loyalty stitched together the broken fragments of a family that should have vanished. Through him, the secret marriage of a queen and a servant did not end in chains or on the executioner's block. It endured, guarded by a protector who lived as though his very breath was borrowed for Henry's sake. England devoured itself. The Wars of the Roses did not unfold as chivalry but as slaughter, a kingdom tearing its own veins open. Streets once filled with trade now carried the stench of blood. Heads of lords and knights were fixed on spikes above city gates, their eyes staring blankly at the crowds below, a warning to all who dared choose the wrong rows. Families split in two, brothers meeting on opposite sides of a battlefield, sons dragged from mothers to die for banners they barely understood. It was not war as glory, it was war as dismemberment. England became a butcher's yard, its fields ploughed not by oxen but by corpses, its harvest the silence of widows. Chroniclers speak of villages emptied overnight, of corpses piled like cordwood, of rivers running red long after battles ended. Amid this chaos, Henry Tudor's survival seemed not only unlikely, it seemed impossible. How could a boy born of scandal and raised in exile ever endure while great houses were burning around him? Every rising sun brought new executions, every victory of York or Lancaster another narrowing of his path. And yet, like a weed growing between gravestones, Henry persisted. Shielded by Jasper, hidden in foreign lands, he became a silent witness to the ruin of his country. In the nightmare England had become, his very survival was defiance, a whisper against the storm. But the storm had not yet reached its peak. and prophecy soon began to twine itself around his name. Amid the blood and ruin, whispers of prophecy began to stir. The Welsh had long carried a tale, older than kings, older than conquest, the legend of two dragons, one red, one white, locked in endless struggle beneath the hills. The white dragon of the Saxons, the red dragon of the Cymry, and it was foretold that one day the red would rise, casting down the white, restoring dignity to a land broken by centuries of domination. When Henry Tudor's name spread through Wales, it did not arrive as politics, it arrived as myth. To his countrymen, he was not merely a fugitive claimant, not merely the son of a scandalous marriage. He was the embodiment of prophecy, the red dragon reborn. His banners would one day carry that symbol, crimson against the pale sky, a flame of hope in a kingdom drowning in despair. Superstition became shield, legend became weapon. For a people beaten into silence, Henry's survival was not chance, it was destiny. In him, they saw not only a claimant to England's crown, but a vindication of their own suffering. The whisper that Wales had not been forgotten, and Henry, shaped by exile and fear, did not resist the myth. He carried it like armor, allowing prophecy to wrap itself around his fragile body until it felt like truth. The hunted boy was no longer prey. He was the red dragon, and England's storm was waiting for him. The sea is restless, its waves thrashing like a heartbeat too fast to calm. After years in exile, the ship creaks beneath your feet, sails straining against the wind as the coast of Wales rises before you. It is August 1485, and destiny approaches in the roar of the tide. Milford Haven opens like a mouth, and you, Henry Tudor, the child of shadows, the heir of scandal, step ashore. You feel the soil beneath your boots, damp and ancient, the same earth your ancestors once bled upon. It is not just land. It is memory, it is curse, it is hope. For every Welshman who whispered the prophecy of the red dragon, your arrival is proof that legend breathes. And yet, the ground trembles with uncertainty. You do not land as a king, you land as a hunted exile with a thin army at your back. Men who have gambled everything on your frail claim. The air is sharp with salt and omen. Each step forward feels heavier, as if the hills themselves are testing you, asking whether you are worthy of the blood you carry. You are both the curse of a forbidden love and the vessel of a nation's hope. From this shore there is no return. Every path leads only to battle, to blood, to the reckoning of dynasties. The red dragon has set foot on home soil, and England must now answer. The field is wet with morning dew, but it will not stay clean for long. Bosworth, August 22nd, 1485, where England's fate will be carved in steel and blood. You stand among men who tremble, their banners snapping in the wind, their prayers swallowed by the distant roar of drums. Across the field waits Richard III, the last Yorkist king, his crown glinting like a curse above the chaos to come. When the armies collide, the world becomes noise, iron clashing, horses screaming, flesh tearing beneath blades. Spears drive into bellies, arrows pierce throats, the air thick with the stench of sweat, mud, and opened bodies. England becomes a slaughterhouse, the ground so slick with gore that men stumble as if drowning in blood. Richard, desperate, charges forward, cutting his way through the melee in a last attempt to kill you, to end the prophecy before it breathes. But betrayal coils around him. The Stanley forces, who swore false neutrality, turn their lances against their king. Richard is dragged from his horse, hacked down among the mud, his skull split, his body stripped, the crown is torn from the chaos, carried not from a palace, but from a corpse, placed upon your head while the battlefield still reeks of the dead. In that grotesque theatre, the hunted child becomes conqueror, and England's nightmare reaches its fevered peak. But victory tastes of iron and ash, for every crown is born from graves. The air is still heavy with the stench of death when the crown is lifted. It does not gleam with majesty, it drips with the weight of betrayal, torn from the corpse of Richard III. Hands carry it through the mud, over broken bodies and shattered steel, until it rests above your brow. There is no cathedral, no choir, no solemn ritual, only carrion birds circling overhead, only the gasps of men too exhausted to cheer. And yet, here, on this field of ruin, you are proclaimed Henry VII. But listen closely, the crown is not only yours, it belongs to ghosts, to Owen Tudor, dragged in chains for daring to touch a queen, to Catherine of Valois, widowed and silenced, who broke the law of kings with a forbidden embrace, to Edmund, who died before his son could know him, to Jasper, who lived a life of sacrifice so you might stand here now. This coronation is not the triumph of chivalry yet, is the triumph of shadows, of whispers, of a dynasty born not in glory but in defiance. The crown rests not merely on a king's head, but on centuries of suffering, on blood spilled in exile and in battle, on the persistence of those the world tried to erase. And as the shouts of allegiance echo faintly across the field, you realize that every crown is a wound, and yours bleeds with the memory of the dead. A dynasty is rarely born in light. The Tudors did not rise from triumph, but from the fragile union of grief and desire. A queen widowed, a servant unnoticed Catherine, and Owen dared to touch across a boundary guarded by law and class. From that moment of defiance came Edmund, Jasper, and Henry, and from Henry, a line of monarchs who would shape England for a century. Consider what followed. Henry VII's reign forged stability from chaos. His son, Henry VIII, tore the realm from Rome, remaking faith itself in the image of his will. And at the end of that bloody chain stood Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, under whom England entered its golden age. All of it naval triumphs, empire's first breath, a flourishing of art and power rooted in the scandalous secret of a widow's forbidden love. Dynasties are not born from glory. They are born from frailty, desire in the wrong chamber, whispered vows, choices made in the dark. Power is not forged only on battlefields, but in the trembling of human hands, in the hunger of the heart, in the defiance of rules meant to cage. Owen Tudor never wore a crown, yet through him and through Catherine, England's destiny bent. Their union was not meant to last, not meant to be remembered, yet it lives still. A reminder that history's greatest empires are built not on perfection, but on forbidden touch. The wind howls over the Thames, carrying the stench of the city and the cries of merchants below. And there, above the traffic of London Bridge, stands the grotesque relic, Owen Tudor's head, spiked and rotting, eyes long since hollowed by birds. Passers-by avert their gaze, yet cannot escape it. His death was meant to be a warning, a final humiliation carved into flesh. But lean closer, closer than history dares. Whisper to that severed face, your death was not the end. What they displayed as shame became the seed of triumph. From your chains, a dynasty rose. From your forbidden touch, kings and queens ruled a century. Henry VII, Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, the Tudors born of your silence, your suffering, your love that dared to defy. It is a cruel paradox. You died mocked as a servant who overreached, yet history remembers you as the root of England's most famous dynasty. The bridge that bore your skull became the foundation of an empire. And so, as the river moves beneath, as centuries pass above, your story remains. Not as a tale of romance, nor as a tale of triumph, but as a meditation on the fragility of fate. Power grows not from crowns alone, but from the wounds, the shame, the forbidden desires we try to bury. The silence on the bridge still speaks, and it tells us that no death, however humiliating, can erase the legacy of blood.